How we doing, folks? Your host Moose here on the Pitt Panthers Football Network as we welcome you to our Season 4 Week 11 around the NCAA recap show. And before we get into what happened in Week 11, we mentioned that after Week 10, the first college football playoff rankings of the season were going to come out and be released. They were. LSU came out top, Auburn second, Penn State third, and Ohio State fourth. So that's your college football playoff as it stands going into Week 11. But, of course, LSU and Auburn are going to play each other at some point this season. Ohio State and Penn State will play each other at some point this season. So you have teams like UCLA, Alabama, Texas, Oklahoma waiting in the wings to jump potentially into the playoff. NC State, even from the ACC, to jump into the playoff if those teams should falter. UAB even hanging around the one undefeated group of 5 team. They're at 13 right now, but if they stay unbeaten and win their conference and everything, who knows, maybe they could get an opportunity to jump in. Your Panthers are currently sitting at 14th in the college football playoff rankings, so they're not out of it, but will definitely need some help and need to win out the rest of the way to have any chance to do that. And we did at least do our part in Week 11 as we beat Georgia Tech 20-14. It was one of those games where, because of the way Georgia Tech plays now, they did rack up some passing yards, especially in garbage time. Taquan Marshall had a late, 50-plus yards on the final drive where they didn't even score a touchdown. I think he added 35 yards or something like that. So it made it look worse than it was with what we gave up through the air. But it was a hard-fought game, of course. We had a touchdown in the second quarter, a touchdown in the third quarter. We didn't do particularly a lot on offense. Kenny Pickett kind of carried us yet again. He led us in passing yards. He led us in rushing yards even, and he did have a rushing touchdown. So he had one passing touchdown, one rushing touchdown. So a nice game for Kenny Pickett. A big game for Maurice French. Receiving-wise, it was nice to see the senior kind of take a lead and really make himself available. He did a great job getting open in this game today, I thought. And we just did what we needed to. But if you look at the stats, very even. Yardage was very close. Rushing and passing yards was very close. Third down conversions was very close. We stopped them on fourth down. That was really the big difference in this game. But overall, it was an okay performance. Maurice French, like I said, led the way. 9 receptions, 120 yards, and caught a touchdown. Paris Ford had a nice game with a few tackles. Patrick Jones, 9 tackles, 5 for a loss, 3 sacks. I mean, he was incredible. Amir Watts had 4 sacks. We had 4 guys with multiple sacks. So we ended up with 11 total sacks on the day. Georgia Tech moved the ball pretty well, though. Tony Green, their tight end, had 7 catches for 117. So each team had one receiver that had a nice big contest. It was really just, it was a pretty fun game because it's interesting when it stays so close. How nerve-wracking it can be. Hopefully we can do a little bit better against our next week's opponent, but we did come away from home with the victory, so it was a big win in that particular case. Wake Forest went to, kept improving their record. Still only 2 losses on the season. A 4 touchdown performance against Syracuse. NC State 28-7, easy win over Boston College. Miami just escaped Duke, who's having a tough year, but they're playing teams fairly close. Clemson, easy win, 45-33 over Florida State. And Virginia Tech, big win over North Carolina. That puts North Carolina down to 2 conference losses, and it's going to make things very, very close and interesting as the season goes on. If we fall and lose, there could be 4 or 5 teams with only 2 conference losses. Around the top 25, UCF and Ben DiNucci, our former starting quarterback, led UCF to a victory over Cincinnati, so that's a big win for the Knights. Georgia beat Notre Dame in a nice ranked battle. Ohio State knocked off Michigan State. Wake Forest beat Syracuse, of course. Oklahoma State stays with 1 loss over TCU. Kansas State beats West Virginia. And the big story of the week, Michigan at home at the Big House in Ann Arbor knocks off Penn State 38-34. Big game for Tommy Stevens of Penn State, but Michigan still end up pulling out the victory 38-34. So Penn State will go into their game with Ohio State this week coming off of a loss. Auburn puts up 59, incredible performance for them as they beat Colorado State. South Carolina beats Florida 31-24, so big win for the Gamecocks. You expect them to maybe be in the rankings this week. UCLA stays unbeaten over Arizona. UAB just fights off Marshall to go to, I think, 10-0 on the season. Texas, or 9-0 maybe. Texas with a win over Kansas, so they're still going to be in the top 10. Arkansas State with a win, Virginia Tech, and USC coming off of a 0-win season last year. They've now got 8 wins already. They're 8-2 this season as they knock off Stanford with a huge victory. It's going to take Stanford out of the top 10 for sure. And then Alabama, the game of the week. They're always the game of the week, apparently. They come away with a win. And here's the biggest ripoff. We had a guy with 3 sacks, 5 tackles for a loss, or a guy with 4 sacks. They lost out on NCAA Player of the Week to Nick McLeod, who had a forced fumble and a pick. Okay, he forced a couple turnovers. I don't understand how that is better than a guy with a 4-sack performance or 3 sacks on 9 tackles. Whatever. But Kendall Hinton, another huge performance for him. 4 touchdowns, gets him ACC Player of the Week. And, I mean, he is making some absolute noise now. He is into the Heisman race, and he is coming up fast on Joe Burrow if he can keep this performance up. Burrow had the week off. I think LSU didn't play. Rico Dowdell in the victory over Florida for South Carolina. 3 touchdowns for him and 100-plus yards, so he jumps up to 2. Felipe Franks falls down despite having 3 touchdowns in the loss. Kendall Hinton, 4 more touchdowns. He's now 4th in the Heisman race, and B.J. Emmons of Bama, the running back, is 5th as he's kind of fallen off the pace a bit lately. But Kendall Hinton, take a look at his stats. 25 touchdowns, 4 picks, and he's run for 8 scores, so 33 total touchdowns for him. Joe Burrow has 36 touchdowns against 5 picks and 4 rushing touchdowns, so 40 touchdowns for him. Kendall Hinton, if he keeps up the pace he's at, he'll be coming up very thick and fast on Joe Burrow. But LSU, like we mentioned, had a bye. They stay number 1. Of course, Ohio State stays 2. Auburn's up to 3, and UCLA's into the top 4 of the coaches poll. After Penn State lost, they fall down to 9. UAB's 5th in the coaches poll. They're not that high in the playoff rankings just because they don't have the strength of schedule, but very good season for them so far. Bama stays at 6. Oklahoma State gets into the top 10 at 10. NC State's number 11. Pitt is going to be 12, so good start for us as we try and mount a comeback. You can see Georgia jumping up to 14, Arkansas to 15. A few teams with some nice bumps because Stanford losing to USC drops them back to 17. USC now to number 20 in the polls, so they're in the rankings for the first time in a very, very long time. Michigan's up into the polls as well at 19 after their victory over Penn State. Wake gets jumped, unfortunately for them. They've had a great season. They're still stuck at 21. Florida falls all the way back to 23 after losing to South Carolina, who's still not ranked, which surprises me. And Cincinnati falls back to 25, still in the rankings despite losing to UCF. Clemson just on the outside. South Carolina just on the outside. And a few teams as well. Notre Dame completely drops out of the rankings, as does North Carolina after their losses. You can see now it's the path forward for us is pretty straightforward in the Coastal. We have 1 loss. If we win out, we'll be in. But Miami could knock us off. We could end up with 2 losses. Virginia Tech could end up with 2 losses, who we beat, and they beat Miami. So it would make things very, very interesting as the season goes on. But we have the inside track. And then the Atlantic, it's basically a 2-horse show. NC State and Wake will play each other at the end of the season, more than likely to decide the ACC Atlantic Division title. Now, they do have some games in the interim. Wake does have to play Louisville this week. NC State has a non-conference game, but then they'll play Louisville again next week. So Louisville's the only team that could really throw a wrench in this as it stands. But we'll play Duke this week. Virginia takes on North Carolina in a tight ACC Coastal Division battle. Georgia Tech, Miami, Wake Forest, Louisville. Virginia Tech out of conference with Washington State. NC State's out of conference with Army, who's 8-1. That's going to be a great matchup. Syracuse plays Clemson, and Florida State will play Boston College. So looking at the big games around the country, Wake taking on Louisville. It's a big game only because it could mess up the ACC Atlantic Division. LSU takes on Ole Miss. LSU's expected to win. They got a great team, but Ole Miss has a lot of talent, so they could always pull an upset potentially. Oklahoma against West Virginia. Should be on upset alert for Oklahoma, but we're expecting them to pull it out against the Mountaineers. NC State taking on Army. Army is 8-1 this season. Number 1 rushing offense in the country going against the number 8 rushing offense in NC State. Both teams have very good defense as well, so that's going to be a slogfest. That game could be over in 20 minutes the way they like to run the ball and move the clock. And finally, Penn State looks to go into Columbus and knock off Ohio State from their unbeaten season. The Nittany Lions, of course, just lost for the first time last week, but Herb Street likes them to bounce back and come with a win, so we'll see what happens there. And finally, we're taking on Duke this week, the Duke Blue Devils. They're 0-5 in the ACC right now. They have a decent team. You see B+ overall, but they have not put it together. Their defense has been very, very poor this season. They get beat on the run. They get beat through the pass. They don't force turnovers. Their rushing offense is not very good. Their passing offense is just as bad. Their total offense is terrible. It should be a walk in the park, which means it never will be, okay? That's how it always seems to happen with us. We struggled a little bit with Georgia Tech last week. Hopefully we won't do the same with Duke, as we do have them at home. If you look at their schedule, though, they've at least been playing better of late. They gave UVA a game. They gave Miami a game and only lost by 5 points. They lost by a touchdown to Syracuse. They started out really well, 3-1 early on. They're actually the only victory over Army, interestingly enough, who's 8-1. Army's won 8 straight, but they've played better lately. It'll be interesting to see. And, of course, the biggest thing that's been hurting them, their quarterback, Danny Dimes, is out for the season with a broken leg. So that's really hurt them, of course. They've had Quentin Harris starting. He's also a senior quarterback. Usually he was kind of the B option, as in he would be more of a wildcat type quarterback and could throw when they needed him to. And, of course, Jones was the main thrower. He's put up some big games against us in this career mode. I think there's a game we beat Duke like 52-38 or something, or 52-31, because they did still pass for a lot of yards. They're not doing that this year. Quentin Harris, 1394 passing yards in 9 games. Although I think Jones played a few at the beginning of the season. He has like 400 yards passing. Nika Dempierre, their leading rusher. You can see nobody really stands out. They do have some good defenders in Giles Harris and some other players, but it's a team that doesn't really intimidate, and so hopefully we'll have a big game against them. Kaiser Artis-Scott should be good to play again. He's still fighting off from that pectoral injury, but he is recovering and did play against Georgia Tech, so we'll expect to see him again this week. Kenny Pickett, nice bounce-back game for him, 2 touchdowns. 16 touchdowns to 10 interceptions on the season. We hope to get more out of the running game. Todd Sibley had 12 yards in the last game, so we hope to get more out of that this week. But otherwise, it should be a great game. So, guys, let us know in the comments who's going to win the Pitt-Duke game. What's the final score going to be? What would you expect us to win by if you do think we're going to win, as well as any of the other big games this week? Penn State, Ohio State, huge game for Big Ten title implications. Who's going to come away with the win there? So, as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate it. Hail to Pitt. And we'll see you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.